There is a clay seal in the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, catalog number IM53981. It is roughly 2 inches wide. You could hold it in one hand and cover it almost entirely with your thumb. A man, or something shaped like a man, stands between 2 columns of cuneiform text. His body is proportioned correctly. His posture is formal. He faces forward. The seal is approximately 4,000 years old, which makes it a relatively recent object by the standards of the site where it was found. The text beside the figure has been translated. It reads, "Before the flood had swept over." That phrase sits on a 2-inch piece of fired clay. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't say which flood. It doesn't say what came before the flood, who the figure is, or why he is standing between those 2 columns of text. It states the phrase the way you'd write a date at the top of a document, as a reference point that the writer assumed the reader would already understand. The flood is not the story. The flood is the timestamp. The seal was found in 1948 during excavations at Tel Abu Sharain, 19 miles southwest of what is now the city of Nasiriyah in southern Iraq. Tel Abu Sharain is the modern name for Eridu, the city that appears at the very top of the Sumerian king list as the first city ever placed on Earth. Not the first city in Mesopotamia, not the first city in the region, the first city anywhere. That is the claim the ancient sources make consistently across multiple independent texts over a period of more than 1,000 years of scribal tradition. And the archaeology, when it has been done, has not contradicted it. What I want to look at in this video is not whether Eridu is old. It is. It's the oldest confirmed urban settlement on the planet. And that fact alone makes it one of the most important archaeological sites in human history. What I want to look at is something more specific. What the excavations actually found, where they stopped, why they stopped, and what the ancient texts associated with this site say is located in the levels of the ground that no one has ever opened. Because here is the thing, the excavations didn't finish. The site wasn't fully excavated. The 2 deepest layers of the world's oldest city are still in the ground, and the texts that predate the excavations by more than 3,000 years, describe something specific at those depths, something with measurements, something with a name. Here is what mainstream archaeology says about Eridu, and I want to be careful to present this fairly, because it is a genuinely well-supported position. Between 1946 and 1949, Iraqi archaeologists Fuad Safar and Seton Lloyd, working under the Iraqi Directorate General of Antiquities, conducted systematic excavations at Tel Abu Sharain. They identified 19 superimposed temple layers, 19 distinct phases of construction built directly on top of one another over thousands of years. The earliest confirmed layer, layer 19 at the bottom, dates to approximately 5,400 BCE. This makes the site roughly 7,400 years old at its oldest accessible point, and it places Eridu comfortably ahead of every other known urban settlement on Earth in terms of continuous occupation. The excavation found pottery, tools, architectural remains, and ritual objects at every level. The material is consistent with a small but organized religious community that grew, over centuries, into a full urban settlement. The pottery sequence is particularly important. Each layer's ceramics correspond to a known typological phase in Mesopotamian prehistory, which means the chronology is independently verified, not just assumed. The stratigraphy is clean. The sequence is coherent. The final site report, published in 1981 by the State Organization of Antiquities and Heritage of Iraq, is a careful and methodologically sound piece of scholarship. The mainstream interpretation that Eridu developed gradually from a simple shrine community into a city through a process of cultural accumulation over millennia is consistent with everything that was actually excavated. There is no internal contradiction in the material record. The site fits the broader model of Mesopotamian urbanization, Small religious center, growing population, expanding administrative complexity, eventually a full city-state. This interpretation is defensible. It is supported by physical evidence across 17 excavated layers spanning more than 2,000 years of occupation. It fits the regional context. It is the product of careful, professional archaeological work conducted under difficult conditions in a remote part of Iraq shortly after the Second World War. But it rests on an assumption worth naming explicitly, that what was found in the upper 17 layers is representative of the whole site, that the picture at layer 17 is not fundamentally different from what lies beneath it, that the two missing layers are more of the same. The excavation reached layer 17 of 19 and stopped. The site report from 1981 confirms in plain language that sublevels beneath layer 17 were identified but not excavated. The official reason given was funding. No alternative funding was sought in the decades that followed. The site has not been systematically excavated since 1949. The two deepest layers of the world's oldest city have never been opened. That is not an interpretation. That is a documented fact in the published record. Let's start with the document that names Eridu as the first city. The Sumerian king list is one of the most studied texts in all of ancient history. 18 copies of it exist, found at various sites across Mesopotamia over more than a century of excavation. The copies were produced at different times, in different cities, by different scribal schools, and they all say the same thing at the beginning. That consistency is significant. It means the opening of the king list was not local tradition, it was consensus. The most complete version is the Weld-Blundell Prism, a four-sided clay column currently housed at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, under catalogue number AN1923.444. It was purchased in 1922 from a dealer in Baghdad and donated to the museum by Herbert Weld-Blundell. It stands about 8 inches tall. You can go look at it in person. The text opens with a formula that appears in all 18 known copies. After kingship had descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu. Then it lists the first 8 rulers of the city, all of them described as having reigned before the flood. The reign durations are as follows: 28,800 years, 36,000 years, 28,800 years, 43,200 years, 28,800 years, 36,000 years, 28,800 years, and 18,600 years. Then the flood. Then kingship moves to another city, and the numbers drop abruptly to human scale, decades, not millennia. The standard scholarly interpretation is that these numbers are symbolic. Mesopotamian numeral systems used base 60 arithmetic, and many of these reign lengths are exact multiples of 3,600. The Sumerian word for which, shar, also carries the meaning of totality or universe. On this reading, the long reigns communicate cosmic legitimacy rather than literal duration. This is a reasonable interpretation. Symbolic numerology is well documented across ancient Mesopotamian texts, and the pattern of multiples is real and consistent. What this interpretation does not resolve is the geography. The king list is not vague about where kingship began. It names a city. It gives that city a specific location. In the marshlands of southern Mesopotamia, at the edge of the Persian Gulf, as it extended further inland in 5000 BCE. That is exactly where Tel Abu Shahrain is. The mythological time frame is anchored to a physical address, and the physical address has 2 unexcavated layers sitting at the bottom of it, at a depth no one has reached for reasons that amount to, "We ran out of money and never went back." The king list doesn't say kingship began in heaven. It says it descended from heaven and landed at Eridu. That landing site is a real place. It has GPS coordinates. It has a site report. It has 2 unexcavated layers. Those are not separate facts. They are the same fact looked at from different angles. In every single excavated temple layer at Eridu, all 17 that were reached, the same architectural feature appears without exception. Directly beneath the central altar of each temple, there is a room. In the earliest layers, it is a shallow depression, roughly 2 feet deep, lined with fired brick. In the middle layers, it grows. In the later layers, it becomes a full subterranean chamber, approximately 12 feet deep and 18 feet across, with walls of precisely dressed stone and evidence of deliberate waterproofing on the interior surfaces. This feature does not appear at other Mesopotamian temple sites with the same consistency. At Uruk, at Ur, at Lagash, subterranean chambers are present, but irregular. Some temples have them, some don't. At Eridu, across 17 layers and more than 2,000 years of continuous construction, every single temple was built over one. That is not a cultural habit. That is a structural requirement. Each new temple was built to preserve access to whatever was below. In Sumerian, this room is called the Abzu. The word is usually translated as deep water or primordial abyss. In Sumerian cosmology, the Abzu is the underground freshwater ocean that underlies the physical world, the source from which all rivers flow and all life ultimately springs. It is the domain of Enki, the god of knowledge, craft, and water, to whom Eridu was specifically and uniquely sacred. Official archaeology describes the Abzu chambers as ritual water basins, symbolic representations of the cosmological concept. The interpretation is internally consistent. Enki's domain was the deep water. The architecture reflects the theology. This is not an unreasonable reading, and I want to be clear about that. But notice the structure of the explanation. Whenever an architectural feature corresponds to a known mythological concept, the feature is classified as a symbolic representation of that concept. The question, whether the myth itself may be describing something that was once physically real at this location, is structurally excluded before it can be asked. The interpretive move is, the texts say there is water here. The architecture reflects the texts, therefore the architecture is symbolic of the texts. What the move does not allow is the possibility that the texts and the architecture both reflect the same physical reality. That possibility is not examined. It is bypassed. This interpretive framework is consistent. It is also designed to make one class of questions permanently unreachable. In 2002, a remote sensing survey conducted by the German Archaeological Institute detected anomalous subsurface cavities beneath the unexcavated southern section of Tel Abu Sharain. The survey used ground-penetrating radar and resistivity imaging, two independent methods that produced different types of data. Both detected the same anomalies. The findings were noted in the published study. They were attributed provisionally to natural geological variation. No follow-up excavation has been conducted in the 23 years since. The study is documented. The anomalies are documented. No one has gone back to determine what they are. The Abzu chambers in layers 18 and 19, if they follow the pattern that holds without exception across every other layer at this site, have never been seen. We do not know if they exist at those depths. We do not know what they contain. The texts say there is water beneath Eridu. The ground-penetrating radar found something beneath the unexcavated section of Eridu. Those are two separate data points from two separate traditions pointing at the same location. Among the artifacts removed from Eridu during the 1946-49 excavations are a set of cuneiform tablets, now distributed across 3 institutions: the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, the British Museum in London, where several are catalogued in the BM 96740 range, and the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology in Philadelphia. Several of these tablets reference a location called Dur Anki. It's worth taking the term apart. In Sumerian, Dur means bond or binding point. Specifically, the kind of connection that holds two things together structurally, the way a joint holds a beam. An means heaven, or the upper realm. Ki means earth, or the lower realm. The full compound, Dur Anki, was translated by Thorkild Jacobsen, the Harvard Assyriologist who worked extensively on the Eridu materials in the 1940s and 50s, as the bond of heaven and earth. Not a metaphorical bond. The tablets describe it as a structural one, a physical point at which the upper and lower realms were simultaneously accessible in both directions. The tablets that describe Dur Anki are not poetic texts. They are not hymns or lamentations. They read more like technical descriptions. They use the same grammatical register as administrative records and building specifications found elsewhere in the Mesopotamian corpus. The location is described in terms of access, who can enter it, from which direction, and what the conditions of entry are. It reads less like a description of a sacred concept and more like a description of a place with a specific protocol. The mainstream reading of Dur Anki is that it functions as a symbolic designation, Eridu as the axis mundi, the center of the world, analogous to the role Jerusalem plays in Christian cartography or Mount Meru in Hindu cosmology. Sacred geography is a documented feature of virtually every ancient urban culture. This is a defensible reading, and it fits a wide comparative literature. What the symbolic reading does not address is the metric. The Dur Anki tablets do not just name a location. They specify a depth. The unit used is the ninda, a Sumerian length measure equivalent to approximately 20 feet. The tablets specify 7 ninda. That is 140 feet below the surface of the ground at Eridu. Not approximately, not symbolically, 7 ninda. The number is given with the same precision used in every other measurement context in the Mesopotamian administrative record. The same precision used to measure field boundaries, canal depths, and temple dimensions. Current estimates place the water table at Tel Abu Sharain at approximately 90 to 110 feet below the surface. 140 feet is below the water table. Reaching that depth at this site would require active water management, pumping, or sealed construction. The tablets are describing a location that would have taken serious engineering to access, and they describe it not as a cosmic abstraction, but as a measurable point in the ground, at a site that has been partially excavated, with 2 unexamined layers sitting between the surface and that depth. The final piece of evidence is not from Eridu itself. It comes from tablets found at Nippur, approximately 100 miles north of Tel Abu Sharain, excavated by the University of Pennsylvania between 1889 and 1900. These tablets are now housed in the Penn Museum in Philadelphia as part of the Nippur Tablet Collection, one of the largest cuneiform archives outside Iraq, consisting of tens of thousands of individual fragments and complete tablets covering administrative, literary, and religious texts spanning more than 2,000 years of Mesopotamian history. Among them are tablets that describe 7 figures called the Apkallu. The word appears in the standard reference work for Akkadian, the Concise Dictionary of Akkadian, edited by Black, George, and Postgate, and is translated as sage, or more precisely as one who possesses comprehensive knowledge. The Apkallu are not gods in the Mesopotamian sense. They do not have temples dedicated to them, do not receive offerings, and are not invoked in prayers. They are not kings. They occupy a category of their own, beings who existed before the flood, who were present at Eridu during the period the king list assigns to the pre-flood rulers, and who are explicitly credited with transmitting the foundations of organized civilization to the first humans. The tablets are specific about what kind of knowledge the Apkallu brought: architecture, agriculture, law, writing, measurement. Each of the 7 Apkallu is paired with one of the pre-flood kings from the king list, serving as an advisor for that reign. The first Apkallu, called Adapa in some versions, Uana in others, is described in the tablets as having emerged from the Abzu, the underground chamber beneath Eridu's first temple. He came from below. He brought knowledge upward. He is the first recorded figure in Mesopotamian tradition, associated with the transmission of technical information, and his origin point is the unexcavated lower levels of the world's oldest city. The mainstream reading of the Apkallu is that they are culture hero figures, mythological beings invented to explain the sudden appearance of complex civilization in Mesopotamia around 3500 BCE. This is a legitimate reading, and it fits a well-documented comparative pattern across ancient mythologies worldwide. What resists this framing is the precision of the language. The tablets describing the Apkallu's activities at Eridu use the same measurement vocabulary, Ninda, that appears in the Dur-Anki tablets. They describe construction at specific depths. They specify structural dimensions. They use the grammatical forms associated with administrative and technical writing, not with literary or mythological narrative. Something in the scribal tradition at Nippur, a city 100 miles from Eridu, preserving records independently, remembered the construction at the world's first city not as a sacred story, but as a technical project with dimensions at a depth we have not reached. Two independent textual traditions, the Dur-Anki tablets from Eridu and the Apkallu tablets from Nippur, describe the same depth at the same site using the same unit of measurement. They were written in different cities. They were preserved in different archives. They are now held in different museums on different continents. And they agree on the number. 7 Ninda, 140 feet, below the water table, below the two unexcavated layers, in the ground at Tel Abu Shahrain, which has not been opened since 1949. We began with a clay seal. Catalog number IM53981, 2 inches wide. A figure standing between two columns of text that read, "Before the flood had swept over." The seal was found in layer 16, 2 layers above the ground that has never been opened. Think about what that means in physical terms. The person who pressed that seal into clay was working at a site that already had 16 layers of history beneath their feet. Each of those layers was a temple, built on the ruins of the temple before it, each one containing a chamber beneath the altar named after the underground ocean. The phrase "before the flood" was not, for this person, a mythological opener. It was a reference point, the way we might say "before the war" or "before the invention of writing." It referred to something specific, something that had already happened, something far enough in the past that it could serve as a temporal anchor for the present. That assumption was made at a site that was already ancient. The seal dates to around 2000 BCE. The city beneath it began in 5400 BCE. The 2 levels below the deepest excavated layer were already in the ground when the seal was pressed. Whatever is in those 2 layers was there when the phrase "before the flood" was written as casually as a date. The seal wasn't explaining the flood. It was using the flood as a known quantity, which means the knowledge it referenced was already old enough to be common. The tablets at Nippur describe a location 140 feet below the surface at Eridu, with a specific name and a specific depth in a specific unit of measurement. The ground-penetrating radar in 2002 detected subsurface anomalies beneath the unexcavated section of the same site. The King List says organized human society began here, before a flood that reset the count. The Abzu chambers appear in every single excavated layer, without exception, 17 times in a row. And the site report from 1981 confirms in plain language that there are 2 more layers in the ground that no one has touched.